She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't belong here."
In her home. At her table. As her son's wife.
And just when she thought she'd finally put me in my place, my chauffeur opened the limo door, called me Ms. Reynolds, and every face at that party turned.
Where are you watching this from right now? Because this story?
It starts with humiliation. And ends with a woman owning the land they tried to push her off of. Your likes and subscriptions tell us to keep bringing you real stories like this, where the woman they tried to erase becomes the one writing the legacy.
Subscribe now, and stay with me. You need to hear how this ends. People talk about heartbreak like it comes from lovers. Mine came in an envelope.
It was ivory-colored, heavy, embossed with the Whitmore family crest, everything about it whispering old money and quiet power. Inside, a handwritten note in perfect cursive.
Family celebration. Saturday, 7 o'clock. Formal.
No signature, just the initials M.W.
Margot Whitmore. My mother-in-law.
I stared at it for a full minute, feeling that familiar chill creep up my spine. Invitations from Margot weren't gestures of love. They were tests, and I had already failed most of them simply by existing. I glanced toward the window of our London townhouse, where my husband Nathaniel was pacing on a call. He looked perfect as always, blue suit, easy smile, a man raised to belong everywhere. I wondered if he realized how many rooms I still had to earn my way into. When he hung up, I held up the invitation. "Your mother's hosting again," I said. He smiled, not seeing the trap. "It's just family, love. You'll be fine." You'll be fine. The phrase every black woman learns to mistrust when stepping into rooms built to remind her she's an outsider. Still, I went. Saturday arrived cold and silver, the kind of London evening that makes even happiness feel expensive. I chose my dress carefully, emerald satin, elegant but modest. Nathaniel told me I looked beautiful. I pretended to believe him. The Whitmore estate stood 40 minutes outside the city, an expanse of manicured lawns and stone pillars. Their parties always felt like museums, polished, whisper-quiet, smelling faintly of champagne and judgment. As we entered the grand hall, conversations paused just a breath too long. Eyes flicked toward me, then away. I'd felt it before. The polite smile that never reached the eyes, the way people's voices soften when they are deciding how to label you. Margot appeared at the top of the staircase like a queen in exile. Pearl earrings, posture sharp enough to cut glass. "Nathaniel," she said warmly, embracing her son. Then her gaze shifted to me, and the temperature dropped 5 degrees.
"Jada," she said.
"You look colorful."
I smiled anyway.
"Thank you, Margot. You look the same as ever." Her lips tightened. Around us, laughter resumed, the brittle kind that breaks if you touch it.
Dinner was worse.
I was seated between one of Nathaniel's uncles and a woman who asked if I'd always spoken English so beautifully. When I told her I was born in Manchester, she blinked as if I'd confessed to being self-taught. I kept my face neutral, my hands folded, every muscle in my body performing composure. Across the table, Nathaniel laughed at something his cousin said, unaware, or unwilling to see, the slow humiliation unraveling beside him. When dessert was served, Margot rose to make a toast. "To family," she said, crystal glass lifted high. "To heritage. To knowing where we come from, and ensuring those traditions continue." Every word was aimed like a bullet wrapped in lace.
People clapped. I swallowed my pride like bitter wine.
Afterward, as music filled the room, Margot approached me. Her perfume was sharp, citrus and ice. She leaned close, voice honeyed but low enough that only I could hear. "You've done well to come, dear," she said. "But I think it's time you let Nathaniel mingle with his own kind. You understand." The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. Before I could speak, Nathaniel turned, our eyes met, and he looked away. That was the moment I knew, whatever love we'd built could no longer protect me. I set my glass down, every heartbeat suddenly calm. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore," I said softly. "You're absolutely right." I walked toward the door, every step measured. Behind me, violins swelled and laughter resumed, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something old and quiet broke open, and something new began to rise. Because while they thought I was leaving in shame, I was stepping into the beginning of their undoing. And outside those marble doors, my driver was already waiting. The first thing I noticed when I stepped out into the night was how still everything felt. No wind. No sound. Just the gentle hum of violins muffled behind closed doors, and the cold press of silence against my skin. I stood at the edge of the Whitmore estate sweeping stone steps, staring down a gravel driveway longer than most people's lives, lined with luxury cars I couldn't name and didn't care to.
For a moment, I wondered if leaving quietly was the right choice.
Maybe I should have made a scene. Maybe I should have stood in that dining room and reminded them I was not an ornament.
Not a project.
Not a footnote in their precious legacy. But that's not how I was raised. I was raised by a woman who taught me that dignity doesn't shout. It exits the room with its back straight, eyes forward, and silence sharp enough to leave a scar. I reached for my phone, not sure what I was about to do, but the screen lit up before I could touch it.
One new message. From a name I hadn't seen in over a year. Victor Langston.
I'm in the city. You all right? Victor, my godfather, my mother's oldest friend, and the man who once told me, you don't need to be invited to the table, Jada. One day, you'll own the damn table. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that I wasn't alone.
I never had been. I just forgot who I was. I tapped to reply. Pick me up.
10 minutes later, I was still standing in that driveway when the Whitmore guests began filtering out. Laughter drifted into the cold, and I heard Margot's voice behind me, light and unbothered. Oh, are you still here?
I turned slowly. She wasn't surprised. She was smirking.
Like I was a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. I thought I asked you to leave, she said, eyes narrowing as she stepped closer. There's a certain decorum we keep here.
Surely you understand.
I met her gaze, steady.
I do.
She stepped even closer now, dropping the pretense.
You don't belong here, Jada.
No matter what ring you wear, no matter what name you take, you'll never belong to this family. People like us, we don't mix with people like you.
She expected me to react. Anger. Tears.
Maybe a protest. I gave her none of it. Instead, I smiled. That's when the headlights cut through the night. A sleek, black chauffeur-driven limo curved up the driveway like it had never made a wrong turn in its life. The driver stepped out, tall, black, polished in a dark tailored uniform with white gloves.
He walked directly toward me and opened the door.
Ms. Reynolds, he said, voice smooth, head bowed slightly.
Margot blinked. Twice.
I turned back to her, stepped into the car without a word, and sat back as the door closed with a sound that felt louder than any slap. As the limo pulled away, I glanced back just once.
She was still standing there. Frozen.
Confused.
Trying to figure out what just happened. She didn't know yet. She would.
Because the woman she tried to humiliate in front of her friends wasn't just walking away.
She was returning, with power. And Margot Whitmore was about to learn the hard way.
You never tell a woman she doesn't belong in a room.
When she owns the land it's built on. Inside the limo, it was warm and silent. Not a word spoken.
Not at first. I sank into the leather seat, legs crossed, hands clasped gently in my lap. Not in anxiety, but in control. The kind of stillness you earn when you've carried your name alone for too long, and finally remember what it means.
Across from me sat Victor Langston. Tall. Regal. A man whose silence speaks louder than most men's shouts.
The kind of presence that makes even the arrogant sit straighter. The world knew him as a billionaire investor. I knew him as the man who gave my mother her first real job when she fled an abusive marriage with nothing but a baby and a suitcase.
And that baby was me. He didn't greet me with pleasantries. He didn't ask what happened.
He just studied me for a long moment, then said, "They tried you, didn't they?" I looked out the tinted window as the Whitmore estate disappeared behind us.
"They did," I said softly. He nodded once.
Then pulled a black folder from his briefcase and slid it across the seat. "I wasn't going to give you this until your birthday next month. But I think you're ready now."
I opened it slowly.
The first page had my name. Jada Elise Reynolds. Beneath it, co-chair, Langston Reynolds Trust.
I blinked.
"What is this?"
Victor leaned forward.
"Everything I've built, the land, the equity, the funding portfolios, the silent partnerships, it's all been growing in that trust. Not just for you, but because of you. Every meeting, every board I brought you to when you were young, every deal you sat through quietly in the corner.
You weren't observing, Jada.
You were being positioned."
I swallowed hard, eyes scanning pages.
Commercial properties in Manchester.
Quiet buyouts in Mayfair. Investment holdings in tech.
Venture shares that dwarfed even Nathaniel's company.
All in my name. He continued.
Your mother never let the world break her.
And neither did you.
But it's time you stopped walking into rooms like you need permission.
It hit me like a heartbeat slamming back to life. I hadn't just walked away from that party. I'd walked back into who I really was. Victor tapped the window.
Margot's family trust has been bidding on a development contract in Shoreditch.
Quietly. Discreetly.
You're about to outbid them.
I looked up, stunned.
Why me?
He smiled. Because they told you that you didn't belong.
And now you're going to own the very deal they've staked their reputation on. My hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of possibility.
It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration.
The truth was, I had never needed their validation.
I just needed to remember that the rooms they guarded so fiercely, I had my own keys. That night, I didn't go back to our townhouse.
I stayed in a penthouse Victor kept in Kensington. The assistant was already there with a fresh wardrobe, keycards, and briefing notes.
By morning, I wasn't the outsider.
I was the competitor. And as I looked out over the city skyline, a single thought crystallized in my mind. Margot Whitmore didn't just ask the wrong woman to leave. She welcomed her biggest threat into her home and dared her to rise.
And now? She was about to watch it happen in real time. I woke up to emails. Not flowers. Not apologies. Not even a message from Nathaniel. Just contracts. Terms. Schedules.
The kind of emails that shape cities quietly, under boardroom lights, not social headlines. It was the first time I truly saw my name not as something I'd been trying to protect, but as something others would soon have to respect. Jada Reynolds.
Co-chair.
Langston Reynolds Trust.
Victor's team had already filed the bid.
The development Margot Whitmore's family had been quietly preparing for, a sprawling mixed-use site in Shoreditch with long-term commercial value, was now in competition. And they didn't even know who their opponent was.
That was the beauty of power they don't see coming.
Over the next week, I sat in meetings with lawyers and architects. I reviewed bids with developers, asked questions Nathaniel used to explain to me like I was in school.
This time, I answered them.
Victor made one thing clear. This isn't personal, Jada.
It's business.
But it can be poetic, if done right.
And so it was. We didn't outbid them with flash or force.
We came in with smarter land use, stronger financial partners, and a proven community model the council couldn't ignore. 2 days before the council decision, whispers started circulating in elite circles. The Whitmore bid might be at risk. An unknown firm is outmaneuvering them. Their investment partners are nervous.
That's when Nathaniel called. Not to check on me.
Not to ask how I was doing after his mother shoved me out of her glass castle.
No. He called because his reputation was trembling.
I answered calmly, my voice flat.
Jada, he said, breathless. What is happening? Mum's in a panic. You disappeared.
And now there's this development thing. Are you involved?
There was a pause. Then the magic words.
Please tell me you're not doing this to spite us.
I almost laughed. Almost.
You watched her humiliate me, I said. And you did nothing. You married a black woman, Nathaniel, but you never once stood beside her.
So no, I'm not doing this out of spite.
I'm doing it because I'm finally done asking for space in a room I never needed to enter.
He was silent. And that silence told me everything.
By the time the council vote came down, it was unanimous.
The Whitmores lost.
Langston Reynolds Trust was awarded the contract, and the name attached to the bid was released publicly the next day. Lead signatory, Jada Elise Reynolds.
I wasn't at home when Margot read the article.
I was in a studio, reviewing early sketches for the new development's cultural center. A space designed to elevate minority-owned businesses, arts, and community clinics. The same people she probably told herself didn't belong in Shoreditch. Now, they'd be building it. Under my direction. And the final touch. The announcement press release went out through one of Victor's media subsidiaries. Not sensational. Not vindictive. Just a quiet statement of truth. What was once gate-kept is now open. What was hidden is now led by those who were told to sit at the back of the room. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be accepted. I was defining what belonging looked like. Not just for me, but for every woman who's ever been told she's too much, too different, too black to sit at a white linen table.
Margot tried to shrink me, but I was never built to be small. 2 weeks passed. Long enough for silence to start screaming. Long enough for Margot Whitmore's name to disappear from the Shoreditch headlines.
Long enough for her trusted inner circle to begin drifting away, carefully and quietly, like people stepping back from a sinking ship they once swore would never touch water.
And then it came. Another envelope. This one wasn't embossed. It wasn't delivered by hand.
It arrived in the mail, in a standard white envelope, the kind you use when you don't want to seem desperate, but you are.
Inside was a handwritten card.
Dear Jada,
I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we spoke out of turn that evening.
I'd like to invite you for tea.
Just you and me.
A quiet conversation. No expectations.
Just clarity. Warmly.
Margot Whitmore.
Clarity? She wanted clarity now?
After dismissing me from her home like a stranger? After watching me walk away in silence, only to realize that the woman she thought she'd shamed into exile had just taken her seat at the table?
I stared at the note for a long time. Not in anger. Not in pain.
Just reflection. There was a time I would have grabbed that invitation with both hands. A time I would have dressed carefully, practiced answers in the mirror, tried to find the perfect balance between grace and apology, all for a seat I was never meant to keep.
But that Jada? She was gone. The new Jada? She didn't chase proximity to power.
She was power, wrapped in grace, sharpened by experience, and finally, unapologetically herself.
So I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to prove.
Instead, that afternoon, I walked into a community gala hosted by my foundation, held in a newly renovated hall in South London, funded by the Shoreditch Project's Phase profits. I stood at the podium, looked out at rows of faces who'd been told they'd never make it past the gate.
Black women, brown men, immigrant families, artists, dreamers, builders. I told them the truth.
I was once told I didn't belong in a room.
So I built my own.
And I made sure the doors don't lock from the inside.
The crowd rose to their feet. Not in noise.
In recognition. And somewhere across town, in that cold, stone estate with a crumbling legacy, I imagined Margot Whitmore sitting at her table, a pot of tea cooling between two empty chairs.
Waiting. Still trying to figure out what exactly went wrong. Here's what went wrong. She mistook my silence for weakness. She thought humility meant lack of power. And she never realized. You can't uninvite a woman who brought the blueprint.
The first thing I did when I walked into my new office was take off my heels. It was a small thing, but it felt like freedom.
No more performing.
No more calculating every expression, every sentence, every step. Just me, barefoot in a glass-walled corner suite overlooking the same city that once made me feel invisible. Behind me, etched in silver lettering on the wall, Langston Reynolds Group.
Impact.
Innovation.
Inclusion. I didn't need the plaque to know I belonged.
I could feel it in the way my team paused meetings until I arrived, not out of fear, but respect. I could feel it in the way interns looked at me like maybe they could do this too. I could feel it in the weight I no longer carried on my shoulders. The weight of needing to be enough.
That was gone now. I don't have to prove anything anymore. Because the rooms that used to make me shrink, they are just rooms. And the people who used to silence me, they've gone quiet themselves.
Nathaniel reached out again, once. He sent a message that read, I saw the announcement. Congratulations. You always were brilliant.
I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to be cruel.
But because some closures don't require doors, just distance. As for Margot, I heard through someone's assistant that her board seat had been restructured.
That she's been quieter lately. More polite. She never sent another card. But I kept the first one.
Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer you can give. One afternoon, I stood on the rooftop of the Shoreditch development, now under construction, and watched cranes rise over the site. A small girl, maybe 9 or 10, stood beside her mother holding a paper folder from our education grant program.
She looked up at me, eyes bright, voice tiny.
Are you the boss of this place?
I smiled. No, baby.
I'm just the woman who made sure you could be. And that's the truth. This was never about tea parties or dinner invitations or inherited names. It was about building something that outlives the hate. Something that doesn't ask for permission, only purpose. And now I walk through every door like I own it. Because once you reclaim your name, once you rise from the table they tried to push you away from, there's only one thing left to say. I never needed to belong to them. They needed to believe I didn't. But the moment they told me to leave was the moment I started writing the blueprint they could never copy. And I haven't looked back since. Your likes and subscriptions remind us that stories like this matter, stories where quiet women rise loudest.
So here's a question for you.
Have you ever walked away from a room, only to realize you were the one holding the power all along? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one.
Like it if you've lived it.
Share it if someone else needs to. And hit subscribe, because we're just getting started.